All right, everyone, another red line for Ebola as there is a second death in Goma. Now, this is sort of the worst case scenario that they've been talking about, postulating. The first was when the epidemic began long ago, and I was like the only person bothering to talk about it. It seemed like even the second-rate hacks of the legacy media wouldn't touch it as a throwaway third-page article. Back then, when there were only a few cases, and I warned that it would become a problem, which it has. Essentially, they said, well, if it makes it to a major metropolitan area, then we'll be worried. It gets to Butembo, city of 500,000 people. Situation, it's similar population to a place like inner Boston. Fairly densely populated, at least locally a transport hub, capable of spreading from there much more easily than from, a town of 10,000 people. Hookups to local areas, including Goma, which was the next step in the process. They said, well, it's an emergency now that it's in Butembo, big problem. And you've got people attacking Ebola centers, you've got a concurrent malarial, resurgence there because of a lack of drugs, because of a civil war actually going on there. So you've got every possible problem in place for a massive pandemic. Nobody's taking it seriously. They say, well, we'll take it seriously if it gets to Goma. Goma is a city with over 1 million people in it. It is far more densely populated, and most importantly, this is the big problem. Whereas Butembo, by third world, deep sub-Saharan African standards, is relatively spread out. It is not so densely populated. It's not slumland. Goma is big enough so that it has, I don't even want to guess how many hundreds of thousands of people living in an extremely expansive sort of ghetto area that's more similar to in Latin America, they have these little neighborhoods with basically no housing codes at all, and people just randomly tack buildings onto one another like it's fucking, Fallout, like it's Diamond City or something, or Megaton, and it sort of looks like that, only, much more densely populated. That's a big problem, because if the virus gets in there, into that particular spot in Goma, the chances of you managing to contain it are pretty low. You've never seen, I think, Ebola hit a population center like that before. Ebola, as far as history knows, has never done this. It's never managed to make it and actually take hold and create new cases in a metropolitan area of this size and with this potential density, again, if it goes into this particular lower class region within Goma. Goma has an international airport. Goma is right on the border with Rwanda, which has closed its border now to try to stop the spread. We'll see if that works, because if you've got one organic case, you could have 3 or 4 more people that are infected walking around with flu-like symptoms right now. The problem is if you get a couple more, the city, the educated and upper class of Goma, which does exist, they will flee or they will lock everything down tighter than your asshole around Joe Biden. So you won't have a lot of movement in the city center. The poor will be fucked. They will probably riot. You'll probably have attacks on Ebola wards. All you need is one attack on an Ebola ward like you've had multiple times in Butembo and all hell breaks loose. If Ebola takes hold in this particular neighborhood, it will engulf Goma. You'll probably have tens of thousands of cases. It will probably manage to jump borders multiple times again, and you will have a pandemic. The problem is that at every possible juncture to stop this disease, nobody took action. Because there's just, hey, we've got an Ebola outbreak. Well, it's sad. Tropical disease, really deadly, infectious agent. It's regrettable. Oh, goodness, it's a localized health emergency. But it's not in Butembo yet, so don't worry. Oh, it's in Butembo now? Well, we'll deploy some vaccine, we'll deploy some serum, we'll pretend that there aren't constant attacks on aid workers, we'll pretend like half these cases aren't the result of guerrilla warfare. No, don't worry about it too much. Oh, it made it to Goma? Well, yeah, we're fucked, basically. So now it's in Goma. Unless they manage to contain it, which they have a poor track record of having done in this particular outbreak, you're fucked. If you're living in Goma, the time to leave is probably now, because if the aid workers there don't manage to identify every single person with it and prevent them certainly from going into that particularly densely populated quarter of the city. Seriously, look at a map of Goma and compare it to a map of Butembo. It's considerably larger. It's right on the border with Rwanda, which, by the way, has a fairly large city on the border as well. It's not even counted as part of Goma's population. Probably probably 50, 60,000 more people. It's very densely populated. There is, on, I believe, the central western side of the city, an expansive area that looks like a city within a city. Those are shanties that you see. That's the sort of situation. You don't have running water. People defecate in the open. There's generally not that much education in these communities. Like, people have a second or third grade equivalent education in most cases. Do you honestly think they understand the concept of contagion to the level needed to prevent Ebola from spreading? No. No, of course not. These are individuals who probably, they sometimes they eat bushmeat. This could cause Ebola anyway. You've got vendors along the street, a lot of unwashed food and produce. You've got cleanliness standards that are low for the third world standards. Like the difference between some business class African investor living in the center of Goma with high rises and shit like that, and someone living 20 blocks away at the edge of the shanties is stark. I mean, people talk about wealth inequality in the U.S. My goodness, there's no such fucking thing compared to there. Or here in the Netherlands, it doesn't exist. Wealth inequality. My goodness, here in the Netherlands, a millionaire lives next door to a homeless shelter. Not an exaggeration. That's one up for the Dutch, by the way. It's an interesting culture. My goodness, though. If you don't fucking get this under the thumb of the medical community, which can be done if they would bother to try, you are going to see suffering the likes of which you cannot comprehend. The problem is, people are always worried about, well, maybe there'll be a nuclear war tomorrow. Maybe there'll be a civil war next year. Maybe there'll be an economic downturn or something. The most obvious, biggest risk in this entire world is disease. Epidemic is the #1 killer of mankind. We're talking about war and all this bullshit. Look at the Black Death. Look at the Spanish flu. Look at whatever the fuck killed off the ancient Athenians. The plague of Constantine. Look at, or Justinian rather. Look at all of these things throughout history. Great empires are brought to their knees. Largely they're by disease. Natural causes. Natural disasters can bring big cities and shit down. The Byzantine walls getting cracked apart by earthquakes. There's one, by the way, interesting event in history. The walls of Constantinople fell to an earthquake. An invading army was approaching, so what they did was they organized people into teams and had them compete to see who could build fastest, and because they were so competitive, they actually managed to rebuild the outermost wall before the invaders got there. Then they came and they were starting to create the facade of the next wall, and it was like taller than it was before, and they're like, fuck it, and they left. A really interesting period in history. In Africa, though, in Goma, how are you supposed to mount an international response? So let's say that the Ebola takes hold. Let's say it starts spreading organically, even if it's only a few dozen cases or something. It's not yet a pandemic within the city. Don't you think panic will set in? Don't you think that people will start behaving differently, those that understand the nature of Ebola? And those that don't, and they don't alter their behavior, sometimes it's going to be high risk. Like a lot of, living in crowded areas, again, a lot of unsanitary conditions. It's not going to be like the average disease, a few people die, maybe people with flu-like symptoms or something. No, this is going to kill half the people that get it. The Black Death won't even compare. If Ebola were to suddenly morph right now, and we know diseases can do this, we know it because it's happened in the human timeline. It's fairly predictable. Every 100 years or so it happens. It's been 100 years since the Spanish fucking flu. Every once in a while, a disease, just by random chance, mutates within a person. That mutant manages to infect one other person, replicate 1 billion times, and then infect a whole bunch of others. It goes airborne, or it becomes more durable, or it becomes more lethal, or any of 1 million other things happens, and all hell breaks loose. It's happened before. Never before in the history of mankind has there been the kind of travel and density in the world that we have today. The Western world thinks, oh, well, this is a third world problem. We've got squeaky clean everything over here. We've got Clorox that we wipe down surfaces with. We've got running water and hospitals. Those hospitals are going to be overwhelmed if Ebola, if it goes airborne, gets over here, the medical apparatus is not going to help. The medical apparatus will be engulfed within weeks. It'll be completely brought down. It won't exist anymore. People will die of 1 million secondary diseases, and there will be secondary epidemics too, until the density is too low to support it, which means half the population in some of these areas will die. Can you imagine? New York City, Manhattan, population of what, 8 million or 9 million, just in Manhattan, I mean, not in the whole city. So look at the whole city. Population, what is it, 15, 16 million? Imagine half of those people die. Where are you going to bury them? There's no graveyard to put them in. Are you going to put them in trucks by the truckload and truck them out to the Pine Barrens and bury them? You going to go up to Yonkers and start putting them in Central Park? You need to start using steam shovels there. I guess build big trenches, just dump people in there and immolate their bodies. Yeah. You'll have a Holocaust's worth of deaths just in Manhattan, let alone the whole entire country. The world at large. Imagine 3-4 billion people die before, it finally calms down. That'd be pretty bad now, wouldn't it? The problem is that it's leering right up into our faces. Nuclear war's not. People are always worried about, there's going to be nukes flying tomorrow. An asteroid might hit Earth. Yeah, eventually it will, and it'll wipe out mankind. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Yeah, there might be a World War III. It could happen. Unless nature preempts it and kills everyone off before there's a World War III. Yeah, of course, it's inevitable. There'll be a nuclear war. It's less likely at any given time than a random mutation in some fucking jungle somewhere. Some fucking jungle out there. There's a bacterium, a virus, a parasite or something just waiting to explode onto the world stage and kill a billion people. People don't even fucking talk about it. You got a city here of over 1 million people with a highly infectious, extremely lethal agent that is now loose, that is in an area, it's a few miles away from a shantytown situation with a massive density. It's a disaster waiting to happen. That's about all. Peace out.